The night fell heavy over the Colorado foothills. A cold wind cut across the valley as ranchers checked their fences, whispering of a shadow they could not control. Far in the timberline, the Copper Creek wolf pack moved silently, their paws pressing into the thin snow. They had been reintroduced as part of a grand experiment, 15 wolves set free to reclaim their ancestral ground. But freedom carries a price, and on this night, the price would echo across the mountains. A low growl turned into chaos. Livestock scattered, ranch dogs barked, and under the faint moonlight, the wolves made their move. For the first time, the Copper Creek family had struck beyond the forest, a choice that would set in motion a story no one could predict. When state officials arrived the next morning, the air was still. Tracks in the dirt, blood in the snow, and the outline of a wolf trap hammered into the ground. Within hours, rangers began the operation, trap snares and relocation crates lined up against the tree line. The Copper Creek pack had become the center of controversy, and everyone demanded answers. Then it happened. The matriarch, the wolf mother, stepped onto the wrong patch of earth. The iron jaws of a trap snapped shut. A piercing cry shattered the silence of the forest. Her pack froze, torn between instinct and loyalty, their yellow eyes glowing in fear. She thrashed, teeth bared, until exhaustion pulled her into the dirt. That sound, half snarl, half plea, was carried on the wind, reaching the ears of a ranger who would change everything. She was the heart of her family, the mother of pups that still waited at the den. Every second mattered. If she did not survive, the entire Copper Creek bloodline could be lost. And as the ranger knelt beside her, torn between duty and compassion, one question cut through the cold night. What happened next shocked everyone. Before the trap was ever set, before the cry of the Copper Creek mother echoed through the trees, there was a man whose life had already been entwined with wolves. His name was Daniel Hart, a wildlife ranger born and raised on the rugged edges of Colorado. He had spent years walking the borderlands where cattle grazed and wild predators tested their boundaries. To Daniel, the wolf was never a symbol of fear. It was a sign that wilderness still had a voice. Daniel's days began before dawn, his boots crunching across frost-hardened grass. He carried maps marked with GPS points, radios crackling with updates, and a heart trained to expect the unexpected. Colorado is changing, he often told his colleagues. If we can't make room for wolves, then maybe we've lost more than we realize. The stage for this conflict stretched across a state torn between memory and modernity. In 2003, Colorado voters narrowly approved Proposition 114, a mandate to reintroduce wolves into their historic range. By 2024, the first 15 wolves were released into the western slopes. Creatures carefully chosen, transported from other regions, and tagged for monitoring. Wildlife officials hoped that within a decade, the state would host 30 to 50 wolves, enough to restore balance, but not enough, they believed, to destroy livelihoods. But numbers on paper rarely match the pulse of the land. In valleys like Copper Creek, ranchers carried their own histories. Their grandparents had fought predators tooth and nail, guarding cattle herds that fed communities. To them, the return of wolves was not restoration, it was intrusion. One rancher was overheard muttering, "They released them to our doorstep, and now we pay the price." The Copper Creek pack was one of the first families to carve out territory. 6 wolves, a dominant pair, their yearlings and newborn pups hidden deep in a den along the creek bed. Wildlife biologists celebrated when they learned that pups had been born, the first confirmation that reintroduction was working. Headlines read, "Colorado wolves breed for the first time in generations." For scientists, it was hope. For ranchers, it was a ticking clock. Daniel, standing in the middle, became both witness and bridge. His childhood had taught him to listen to ranchers. His uncle had lost calves to predators in the 90s. But his career had given him another perspective. Every ecosystem thrives only when predators exist. Wolves don't just take, he explained in interviews. They shape rivers, forests, even the flight of birds. They remind us that we're not in control. When news of livestock attacks spread, the balance fractured. On one side, conservationists demanded patience. On the other, ranchers demanded action. And in the middle was the Copper Creek pack creatures, unaware of laws, ballots, or human arguments. They followed hunger instinct and the bonds of their family. Daniel often stood at the line where forest met pasture, radio in hand, waiting. He could hear cattle lowing in the distance, could see elk herds moving like shadows across the ridges. And somewhere, always somewhere, he knew the Copper Creek wolves were watching. He kept notes in a weathered field journal. Entries told of fresh paw prints by the creek scat samples tagged for DNA, distant howls that carried through the night. There was admiration in his words, but also caution. He knew conflict was inevitable. It's not if, he wrote, it's when. The environment itself told the story. Colorado's western slope was a mosaic of aspen groves, sagebrush plains, and fast rivers cutting through canyons. To wolves, it was paradise. To ranchers, it was territory to defend. Each sunrise brought another chance for the two worlds to collide. For the Copper Creek mother, survival meant moving her pups across terrain dense with scent markers, avoiding roads and ranches, keeping them hidden from human eyes. She was strong, wary, a survivor of relocation herself. Biologists had tracked her lineage to Idaho, descended from wolves reintroduced to Yellowstone decades earlier. In her DNA ran the legacy of one of America's greatest conservation experiments. For Daniel, she was more than a data point. He often told colleagues, "You can't measure what it feels like to see a wolf lock eyes with you. In that moment, you realize wilderness is still alive." But not everyone agreed. Ranch meetings filled with shouts. How many calves have to die before they act? Lawmakers demanded accountability. Wildlife officers debated between relocation and lethal control. Each decision carried weight. Each misstep, the potential to unravel the fragile trust of the public. The stage was set, one ranger, one pack, and one state caught between restoration and resistance. And as the Copper Creek family's story unfolded, the choices made in these valleys would ripple far beyond Colorado. But Daniel's first true encounter with the Copper Creek pack would not come on a calm morning. It would come on a night when instinct, injury, and fate collided. The radio crackled just past midnight. Daniel Hart's eyes snapped open as a dispatch came through: activity detected near Copper Creek. Possible contact with wolves. Proceed with caution. He pulled on his jacket, grabbed his field kit, and drove into the night. The air was brittle with frost. Headlights slicing through mist that clung to the valley floor. Every ranger prepares for moments like this, but nothing truly readies you for the sound of an animal in pain. As Daniel stepped out of his truck, the first thing he heard was a cry unlike anything he had ever recorded. It was not the confident howl of a wild wolf, but a broken call, ragged and desperate. His boots pressed into the frozen earth as he followed the sound. The beam of his flashlight swept across the trees until it caught silver eyes reflecting back. There she was, the Copper Creek mother, trapped in steel jaws. Her leg was twisted, blood seeping into the dirt. Her body shook with rage and terror, lips curled, teeth flashing in the dark. Daniel froze. Every instinct screamed to back away. Wolves are powerful, unpredictable, and dangerous when cornered. But then he saw something else. Just beyond the clearing, tiny shapes shifted nervously in the shadows. Pups. Eyes wide, bodies trembling, waiting for their mother to rise. Their whimpers carried across the clearing, thin and fragile. That sound pierced through Daniel's fear. This was not just a predator caught in a trap. This was a family fighting for survival. Daniel's heart pounded. He reached for his radio, whispering, "Female wolf injured. Pups nearby, requesting backup." Static answered. No signal. He was alone. The wolf lunged as he shifted closer, steel trap rattling, her growl shaking the air. For a moment, Daniel considered retreat, but retreat meant leaving her to die. And if she died, the pups would not last the week. Their survival depended on a choice he had to make, right here, right now. His training echoed in his mind. Approach slowly. Keep eyes low, avoid sudden movement. He spoke in low tones. Not words meant to calm her, for wolves do not understand, but sounds meant to announce that he was not a threat. The mother's ears flicked back, her breathing ragged, but her eyes locked on him, fierce and unyielding. Daniel laid his kit on the ground, a pair of heavy gloves, bolt cutters, syringe of tranquilizer. He had prepared for this, in theory, not in reality. With trembling hands he loaded the syringe. One chance. If he failed, she could lash out with devastating force. He inched forward, every step measured. The pups whined louder. The mother lunged again, teeth clashing inches from his boots. His voice cracked, but he pressed on. The world narrowed to her golden eyes, the trap, and the sound of his own breathing. At last, Daniel found his angle. He thrust the syringe forward, nicking her haunch before leaping back. The wolf snarled, teeth snapping, then stumbled. Her growl softened into a whimper as the sedative began to work. She collapsed, body shuddering, chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. For a moment, the valley fell silent. Daniel stood, frozen syringe still in hand, until he realized what had just happened. He had subdued one of the most feared predators in North America, alone in the dead of night. But there was no victory here, only urgency. He knelt beside her, gloved hands working quickly to pry open the trap. The iron jaws resisted creaking until finally they gave way. Her paw was mangled blood, slick across fur. Daniel wrapped it with gauze, his hands steady now, guided by something beyond training, compassion. He looked up. The pups had crept closer, their small bodies huddled together, eyes wide with confusion. One tilted its head, ears twitching as if sensing the shift. For a brief second, predator and human shared the same silence, fear, relief, and fragile trust suspended in the cold air. Daniel lifted the mother into a crate, his breath clouding in the night air. The pups cried out, their voices thin but persistent. As he closed the latch, he knew the hardest part was still ahead. He had saved her life, but what came next would test every bond between man and wilderness. The Copper Creek mother awoke beneath the sterile glow of fluorescent lights. Gone were the shadows of the forest and the icy sting of the trap. In their place, clean steel tables, gauze, and the careful hands of veterinarians moving around her. For the first time since Daniel found her, she was safe, though she did not know it. Her body tensed as she thrashed against straps, growls echoing off tiled walls. Every fiber of her being screamed to return to the wild, to rejoin her pups waiting somewhere in the valley. But pain held her down. The mangled paw bore deep wounds, infection threatening to spread. Time was their enemy, and every moment mattered. Daniel watched from behind a glass partition. He wasn't part of the surgery team, but he couldn't look away. Each flicker of the wolf's ear, each tremor in her chest, reminded him of the thin line between survival and loss. "She's a fighter," the vet murmured, stitching with steady hands. "If she makes it through tonight, she'll make it through anything." Hours passed before the mother finally lay still, breathing deep and even. The operation had succeeded, but recovery would demand more than bandages. It would demand resilience. Over the next days, Daniel made himself present during feedings. At first, she rejected everything, meat left untouched, water spilled as she snapped at bowls. He kept his distance, speaking softly, never forcing. Each attempt ended in snarls, eyes burning with suspicion. But gradually, hunger overcame fear. She began to eat in his presence, muscles still taut, gaze unbroken. It was the first thread of trust. Beyond her enclosure, the pups were under observation as well. Biologists had managed to track and safely relocate them after the capture. They were thin ribs, showing, but alive. Daniel remembered their cries in the forest, and now heard them echo inside kennels. Fragile, yet determined, they pressed tiny noses against the bars whenever footsteps passed. Their survival depended entirely on humans, a bitter irony in a program designed to keep wolves wild. Weeks blurred into routine. Clean wounds, replace bandages, record vitals. Every day Daniel logged her progress in his journal. Day 7, still limping, but eyes alert. Day 14, accepted venison without aggression. Slowly, the fierce growls gave way to weary silence, then cautious acknowledgement. And then came the turning point. One evening, as he set down food, she did not retreat to the back of the enclosure. Instead, she remained still, eyes following him, but no longer filled with hostility. Her chest rose, fell, and then nothing. No growl, no threat, just breath. Daniel froze, realizing she had made a choice to tolerate his presence. In that fragile silence, the first bond was forged. But survival is rarely a straight path. Midway through her recovery, the mother collapsed, fever burning through her body. Infection had returned. Vets rushed in, needles and fluids ready. Daniel stood helpless as monitors screamed the wolf's breath, ragged. For hours they battled bacteria invisible to the eye, but lethal to the body. When dawn broke, she stirred again, chest rising with steadier rhythm. Relief crashed over Daniel like a flood. Against all odds, she had fought back. And in that moment, he understood something vital. Wildness is not fragility. It is endurance. Meanwhile, the pups were growing fast. Playful snaps turned into mock hunts, their small bodies leaping across straw. They tumbled, wrestled, and barked in squeaky tones, their instincts unfolding before human eyes. Daniel often lingered by their enclosure, scribbling notes while suppressing a smile. It was easy to forget that one day they would be wild again, no longer confined by fences. The most unforgettable moment came on a quiet evening. The mother, still weak but alert, rose on 3 legs and lifted her head. A low, trembling howl escaped her throat. From across the facility, the pups responded, voices high and uncertain, but filled with longing. The call traveled through corridors, merging into a chorus. Staff paused their work, silence spreading as everyone listened. It was not noise. It was family. That night sealed something in Daniel's heart. He was no longer just a ranger or caretaker. He had become a witness to resilience, to bonds that defied cages and wounds. Yet he also knew this was temporary. Wolves are not meant for walls. The wild was calling, and every day they healed brought them closer to release. Still, doubt lingered. Would they survive once freed? Would ranchers forgive? Would the state even allow a second chance? The answers were unclear, but one truth stood firm. Daniel had saved a life. And in return, the Copper Creek mother had taught him that trust can bloom even where fear once ruled. But survival inside 4 walls is only the beginning. Outside, storms were brewing, storms that would push man and wolf into their greatest test yet. By early spring, the Copper Creek mother had healed enough to stand on all 4 legs again. Her limp was noticeable, but her spirit was unbroken. The pups, growing stronger by the day, were restless in their enclosures. Their bodies pressed against the chain-link fences, eyes darting to every flicker of movement. For weeks, the staff debated, was the family ready to return to the wild? Nature made the decision for them. A storm was brewing over the Rockies, one that forecasters called the fiercest in a decade. Heavy snow, freezing winds, and roads already blocked by fallen timber. The facility braced for impact, but no one anticipated how quickly the storm would spiral. Power lines snapped, lights flickered, and then, in the middle of the night, alarms screamed. The storm ripped open a section of the rehabilitation wing. Debris scattered, doors rattled against their hinges. Wolves, panicked by the chaos, hurled themselves against barriers. Daniel and his team rushed through corridors, shouting orders drowned by howling wind. Then came the moment that froze Daniel's blood. The enclosure holding the pups shuddered under the force of debris. A beam cracked overhead, threatening to collapse. He sprinted forward, arms raised as the ceiling gave way. He caught sight of them, 4 pups huddled in the corner, eyes wide, bodies trembling. Without hesitation, he dove, pulling them into his arms as the beam slammed down where they had stood seconds earlier. The impact rattled his bones, but the pups were alive. Chaos surged. Wolves howled, their voices colliding with the storm. The Copper Creek mother, still recovering, but fierce as ever, threw herself against her gate. Metal screeched. Sparks burst from failing lights. And in that moment, Daniel realized something terrifying. If the enclosures failed completely, the wolves could escape into a storm that would almost certainly kill them. They needed to act fast. The team gathered voices barely audible over the storm. "Relocate them now," someone shouted. "It's too dangerous here." But moving wolves in the middle of a blizzard was almost unthinkable. Trucks risked sliding off roads. Tranquilizers might not hold. Yet the alternative, remaining in a collapsing facility, was worse. Daniel made the call. "We're moving them. Tonight." The decision launched a desperate operation. Crates were lined, sedation doses prepared. Staff worked with frantic precision, each second measured against the howl of the storm. Daniel steadied the mother first. Her golden eyes met his as the tranquilizer took hold. For a heartbeat, trust flickered between them. She collapsed gently, her body lowered into a transport crate. The pups were next, squirming, squealing, but bundled safely. Snow blasted through open doors as the team pushed crates toward trucks. Engines roared to life, tires struggling against drifts. The convoy rolled out, headlights swallowed by blinding white. The mountain roads were treacherous. Ice claimed traction, snow swallowed tracks within minutes. Daniel gripped the wheel until his knuckles whitened, his eyes straining to follow faint red taillights ahead. At one point, a fallen tree blocked the road. The convoy stopped, engines idling in the dark. For a long moment, the wolves stirred in their crates, restless. The team leapt out, chainsaws buzzing against frozen wood. Sparks flew the air, thick with exhaust and snow. Daniel's breath came in ragged bursts as he fought against the storm blade biting into timber. Finally, the road cleared. The convoy surged forward again, inch by inch deeper into the night. Hours blurred. The storm refused to relent. Inside the crates, the wolves whimpered, claws scraping metal. Daniel whispered to them, nonsense words mixed with prayers. "Hold on. Just hold on." Near dawn, they reached a temporary holding site, a reinforced cabin deep within the forest. The team stumbled inside, soaked, exhausted, and trembling. Crates were lined against the walls, blankets thrown over to keep warmth. The storm still raged, but for now, they were safe. The Copper Creek mother stirred first. Her head lifted weakly, eyes catching Daniel's. She did not snarl. She did not bare her teeth. Instead, she remained still, gaze steady, as though recognizing that he had carried her family through fire and frost. Daniel collapsed against the wall, chest heaving, the weight of the night pressing down. Around him, staff murmured prayers of relief, some wiping tears they hadn't realized had fallen. They had survived, wolves and humans alike, against odds that seemed insurmountable. But in that fragile calm, a new truth emerged. Wolves had endured trap surgery, and now a storm. Each trial had deepened their bond with Daniel and his team. Yet every victory carried a reminder: captivity could not last forever. The wild was calling louder with each passing day. And Daniel knew the greatest challenge was still ahead, not surviving storms, but surviving the world outside. Ranchers were waiting. Laws were tightening. And soon the Copper Creek family would face the test that no storm could drown human conflict. They had conquered nature's fury together. But when the storm cleared, it would be people, not weather, that threatened to tear them apart. When the storm finally broke, Colorado awoke to a different kind of turbulence, one not written in snow or wind, but in headlines and town meetings. News spread quickly. Wolves had attacked cattle, been captured, treated, and then nearly lost again during the Great Storm. The Copper Creek Pack had become a symbol, depending on who you asked, either of resilience or of reckless government policy. Ranchers gathered in fire halls and barns, voices raised above the hiss of coffee urns. Some held photographs of calves torn apart, demanding compensation. Others demanded more than money. "We didn't vote for wolves," one man spat. "They voted for them in Denver. Let them live with them in Denver." The crowd erupted in applause. Daniel stood in the back of one such meeting, cap pulled low. He knew these faces. Neighbors, distant relatives, people he had shared meals with. Now their eyes burned with anger. He wanted to tell them about the mother's strength, the pup's desperate cries, the storm that had tested all of them. But he stayed silent. His role was not to sway emotion, it was to enforce policy. At the state capitol, the debate was no less fierce. Lawmakers argued across chambers, conservationists citing ecological balance, ranchers citing generational livelihoods. Funding proposals clashed with calls for lethal control. The Copper Creek Pack, now infamous, sat at the center of every argument. Meanwhile, the wolves themselves waited in silence within their rehabilitation site. They knew nothing of politics, nothing of economics. They knew hunger, loyalty, and the strange smell of humans who now defined their days. For Daniel, the hardest moment came when federal wildlife officials arrived to inspect the wolves. Clipboards in hand, they circled the enclosures, murmuring about risk factors and public perception. One inspector leaned close to Daniel. "You understand, these animals may never be releasable. The public won't tolerate it." The words struck like a blow. Daniel had fought storms, traps, and nights without sleep for this family. To think their fate could be sealed by paperwork felt unbearable. Yet not all voices were against the wolves. Some residents stood up at meetings, quiet but firm. "I lost livestock too," a rancher admitted, "but the wolves didn't take more than coyotes ever did. And they keep the elk herds moving. Without them, we lose balance." His words were drowned by boos, but Daniel caught them, held onto them like a lifeline. The legal tension grew sharper. State regulations required that relocated wolves eventually be reintroduced unless deemed unfit. Federal guidelines demanded transparency, but public anger demanded caution. The Copper Creek family sat in limbo, too wild to remain in captivity, too controversial to be freed. Daniel returned nightly to the facility. He sat near their enclosures, journal in hand. The pups had grown now lanky with adolescent energy. They sprinted circles, practicing mock hunts, muscles rippling. The mother watched, steady and protective, her golden eyes softer now, scar on her paw a permanent reminder. Daniel often whispered, "You deserve the wild, not these walls." Then came the petition. Ranchers filed a formal request: the Copper Creek wolves should be permanently removed, either relocated to distant sanctuaries or euthanized. The words cut deeper than any storm. Daniel attended the review session, tension heavy in the air. Charts, testimonies, and statistics filled the hours. Every number seemed to erase the individuality of the wolves he had come to know. Finally, a biologist stood. She spoke not of numbers, but of stories, how wolves shape landscapes, how rivers bend differently when elk move under predator pressure, how forests breathe more freely when balance is restored. She ended with a line that echoed in Daniel's chest. If we destroy every wolf that causes conflict, we destroy the very reason we brought them back. The room fell into uneasy silence. The battle was far from won, but a seed had been planted. Still, compromise loomed. Officials considered releasing the Copper Creek Pack into a restricted wilderness area, remote, heavily monitored, away from ranching communities. It was not true freedom, but it was survival. Daniel knew the choice would come soon. He walked the facility one last time that week. The pups pressed their noses to the bars, whining as he passed. The mother lifted her head ears, twitching her gaze, following him until he disappeared from view. He closed his journal with a heavy sigh. The time for decisions had arrived. The storm had tested their strength. Now human judgment would test their very right to exist. The decision came on a clear morning. After months of debate, petitions, and sleepless nights, Colorado's Wildlife Commission delivered their verdict. The Copper Creek wolves would be released, monitored, tracked, and closely studied, but free. The ruling was not unanimous. Some voices still demanded removal, others feared retaliation from ranchers. But the wolves had earned a second chance. Daniel felt both relief and dread wash over him. He had fought for this outcome, yet he knew what it meant: farewell. The family he had guarded through trap surgeries and storms would soon return to a world that might not forgive them. Preparations began immediately. Crates lined the loading bay once more, but this time the mood was different. Staff moved slowly, some whispering soft goodbyes. Daniel lingered by the pups, now grown into strong adolescents. Their bodies pressed against the mesh-yellow eyes, unblinking. They no longer whimpered when he passed. They were ready for the wild, even if his heart was not. When the day arrived, trucks rumbled toward a remote valley deep within the Rockies. Snow still patched the ground, but rivers ran strong with meltwater. This land was chosen carefully: rich prey, thick forests far from ranches. A place where survival would depend not on fences, but on instinct. Daniel rode in the lead, truck journal clutched tight in his hands. He watched the crates sway with every bump, his breath clouding on the window. Memories pressed in, the mother collapsing under infection, the pups answering her howl the night of the storm. Each trial had carved a bond between man and wolf, an invisible tether stronger than steel. At last, they arrived. Staff formed a quiet circle around the crates. Cameras clicked, pens scribbled, but the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Daniel knelt beside the mother's crate first. Through the bars, her scarred paw pressed against metal. For a fleeting moment, her eyes met his. Not with fear, not with anger, with something deeper: recognition. The latch swung open. For a heartbeat she hesitated, ears twitching to the chorus of birdsong. Then, with one powerful stride, she bounded into the trees. Snow sprayed behind her, her body weaving through shadows until she vanished. One by one, the pups followed. They darted forward, clumsy but determined, their youthful energy bursting into the forest. Their howls rang out high, unpolished but fierce. The mountains answered with echoes, a wild chorus welcoming them home. Daniel remained behind as the others packed equipment. His boots sank into snow, his eyes scanning the tree line where the family had disappeared. He told himself this was success: wolves restored to wilderness. But farewell has its own weight. Then, as he turned to leave, a sound carried across the valley. A long, steady howl, deep, resonant, familiar. The Copper Creek mother. She had not left without a sign. Daniel froze, heart pounding. She was calling, not in defiance, but in remembrance. He closed his eyes, listening. The pups joined her, their voices weaving into hers. The chorus rose, echoing through pines and canyons, filling the valley with a sound Daniel knew he would never forget. Tears burned his eyes. He whispered back, though no wolf could understand, "Run free. Stay safe. Remember this bond." The moment passed. The forest grew still again. The wolves were gone into wilderness, into history, into the unknown future. Daniel stood alone in the clearing, journal pressed to his chest, the echo of their howls still vibrating in the air. He had let them go. But would the world beyond the trees allow them to stay? The forest swallowed the Copper Creek pack, but their story did not fade. In the weeks that followed, biologists tracked signals from radio collars, watching as the family carved new paths into the Rockies. They roamed valleys thick with elk-crossed rivers, still swollen with snowmelt, and dug dens in shadowed slopes. Against every obstacle they endured. News of their release rippled across Colorado. Conservationists hailed it as a triumph, proof that coexistence was possible. "The wolves are back," one headline declared. School children drew pictures of howling silhouettes pinned on classroom walls. Yet in ranching towns, the response was different. Conversations simmered with tension. Some ranchers carried rifles closer to hand. "Let's see how long before they take another calf." One muttered voice, low but heavy with warning. Daniel read every headline, heard every whisper. But he also read the telemetry data, proof that the Copper Creek wolves were not raiding barns, but chasing elk herds miles from human settlements. Each beep on his receiver told him what he had always hoped: they were adapting. Then came the moment Daniel had secretly longed for. On a cool evening, he returned to Copper Creek Valley, the place where it had all begun. He set camp near the old den site, journal, open recorder ready. As the moon climbed, a sound broke the stillness, a low, steady howl. His chest tightened. One voice became two, then four, then many. The pack was together, their calls weaving into the mountain air. Daniel's eyes glistened as he wrote, "They survived. They are whole." He lowered his pen, simply listening. Each note carried not just the voice of wolves, but of everything they had overcome: traps, surgeries, storms, and the weight of human judgment. Weeks later, field cameras captured images of the pups, no longer fragile but strong, lean, and hunting under their mother's watchful eye. They bounded across snowfields, chased rabbits, and wrestled in tall grass. Scientists smiled as they analyzed footage. For Daniel, each frame was a reminder that hope could survive even in the harshest trials. But life outside the facility was never without danger. Coyotes trailed the wolves, black bears tested their boundaries, and one late spring storm nearly buried their den. Yet each challenge strengthened them. Where once Daniel had worried they might falter, now he believed they would endure. The human world adjusted slowly. Some ranchers, still bitter, pressed for stricter controls. But others, witnessing fewer elk in hayfields and healthier forests, began to soften. One rancher admitted, "They're out there, but they're not here. Maybe there's room after all." Daniel took comfort in these small shifts. Progress was never loud. It was quiet, steady, like the paw prints of wolves fading into snow. In late summer, he returned once more to the valley. The air shimmered with heat, rivers glinting under the sun. As he scanned the ridges, movement caught his eye, a shadow slipping through the timber. The Copper Creek mother. Her scarred paw left a faint mark in dust, proof of her past. She paused, lifted her head, and locked eyes with him across the distance. For a breathless moment, neither moved. Then she turned, her body melting back into the forest. But before vanishing, she stopped, raised her muzzle, and howled. The sound was low, rich, and certain. Her family answered from the ridge. Daniel smiled, journal trembling in his hands. It was not goodbye. It was confirmation they belonged here. In the hush of the Colorado wilderness, a family's howls rose into the sky, not as captives, not as symbols, but as wolves. and for the first time in generations, the valley of Copper Creek was alive again. The story of the Copper Creek wolves was never just about animals. It was about us, our choices, our fears, and our capacity for compassion. From the moment the mother wolf's paw was caught in steel to the night Daniel carried her pups through a storm, every chapter revealed the fragile balance between human ambition and wild survival. We learned that conservation is not a straight path. It is messy, filled with setbacks, arguments, and doubt. Ranchers spoke of loss. Biologists spoke of balance. And in between stood the wolves themselves, living symbols of resilience. Their howls reminded us that nature does not negotiate. It simply exists. The question is whether we are willing to make space for it. We also learned that trust can grow in the unlikeliest of places. Daniel never set out to bond with wolves, yet through countless nights of fear, patience, and endurance, he became more than a ranger. He became a witness to their spirit. His journal did not record just data points. It recorded connection. The mother wolf, scarred but unbroken, became a testament to survival. Her pups, once trembling in the shadows, grew into hunters beneath Colorado skies. Together, they embodied the reason reintroduction mattered, not to tame wolves, but to let them be wolves again. And perhaps the greatest lesson was this: we are part of the story too. Our fences, our laws, our votes, they shape whether wolves run free or vanish forever. The Copper Creek family reminded us that conservation is not about perfect harmony, but about compromise, persistence, and respect. For those who doubted their survival, offers proof. For those who believed their howls are vindication. For everyone, their story is a reminder that what we choose today decides what the wilderness will sound like tomorrow. The Copper Creek wolves are not legends. They are real, alive, and out there now, shaping rivers, chasing elk, and filling valleys with voices not heard for generations. Their journey is proof that even in a divided world, restoration is possible. If their story moved you, help write the next one. Support wolf conservation, share their journey, and subscribe to our channel. Because somewhere tonight in the wild heart of Colorado, the Copper Creek family is still howling.